Welcome to Empowered Living. I'm Ann Shu. On this podcast, innovative leaders and visionary experts share insights and practical tools for work, family, and marriage. Each episode, we'll explore how to elevate your life while staying grounded in what truly matters to you. You're working hard to navigate relationships, build a thriving family, and create a legacy of purpose. We're here to help you do that with confidence and intentionality. So if you're ready to live a life by design, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Empowered Living, the podcast where we explore the habits and conversations that help us build more intentional, resilient lives. I'm your host, Ann Shu, and today we're talking about resilience. What does it really take to build mental fitness and bounce back in a world that often feels overwhelming? I'm joined by Dr. Carrie Johansson, known by many as Dr. Carrie, or the Sensible Psychologist. She's author of Self-Help on the Go, and she's a corporate trainer with the Resilience Institute. Her work focuses on helping people strengthen their mental health, develop resilience, and create meaningful lives rooted in values. In this episode, Dr. Carrie and I talk about why your values matter more than you think, the difference between collapsing and truly resting, how to build mental fitness through sleep, movement, and nutrition, and the role of psychological flexibility in managing anxiety and burnout. Whether you're a leader trying to support your team, a parent looking for balance, or simply someone craving more energy and purpose, this episode will give you practical tools and a fresh perspective. Let's dive in. All right, Dr. Carrie, I am so excited to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you, Ann. I'm excited to be here.
It's been a while since we've seen each other, and when we were together last, we were walking through your no matter what values at the workshop that I was leading at the WPO event.
Absolutely. I've really enjoyed that workbook. I think values work is pretty foundational. So I loved how you put everything together in one spot.
So tell me what you ended up with for your no matter what values.
So my no matter what values are connection, wellness, curiosity, and adventure/freedom. It depends on the day which one I lean on for that.
I love that. And how do those values show up in the work that you do day to day?
They really drive, I think values actually really drive me. And another one of my no matter what values is kindness. And so it's both personal in terms of like, if I wake up on the wrong side of the bed, right? Like we all do sometimes. If that value of kindness, if I remind myself of that, then I can wake up on the wrong side of the bed and still be kind to other people and to myself. At work, that level of connection and curiosity keeps things really fresh in the therapy room and also when I'm doing workshops, because if I'm curious about what's going on for you, then I'm going to be learning and we're going to have and facilitate a better connection. And then on the weekends is all about freedom and adventure and, what's a new hike or a new restaurant or even a new recipe that sort of scratches that particular itch.
So the cool thing about these no matter what values is, even though I just met you very briefly at WPO, I feel like those values are just oozing out of you. Like when you say them, I'm like, oh yeah, that totally tracks with what I experienced at the event and how I interacted with you and our conversation. And so that I love that the no matter what values are really showing up even in a brief interaction.
And I think that's really true. One of your no matter what values is this deep conversation, right? Like you actually want real big connections with people and just having a short conversation. We weren't talking about silly surface level stuff. It was like, it went from there to here really quickly. And that's really fantastic. And I think that's actually something that people don't always understand about values is we're communicating them all the time, non-verbally, in our actions. And so it's great to take a look at if you think this is important to you, but you're often behaving like that. That's a really good opportunity to take a look at that difference.
Absolutely. Those values when they show up, even if we don't try, even if we don't want them to show up, right? Like we had somebody in one of our workshops say, do I need to share these values? Because it's kind of embarrassing. Like, I don't want people to know. I was like,
you're like, we already know.
If you actually are on the right track and you're getting your no matter what values, like people know, even in a brief interaction, they know. Like there's no hiding it,
No. And they're also on a big continuum, right? Like if I take the I'll call it we'll call it adventure today. Sometimes I call it freedom, but we'll call it adventure today. If we take that no matter what value of mine, on the like really low, easy breezy end of the continuum, it's trying a new recipe. On the, much more complicated end of the spectrum, it's a year ago, I did something called a via ferrata, which is essentially like a combination of hiking and rock climbing. And it was absurdly scary, right? And also really cool and a great accomplishment. And 5 of my other friends were also ridiculous enough to be willing to do this with me. But several of my friends were like, no, I'm not that adventurous, right? Like to them, it was too adventurous. And to me, even though there were parts of it that were really hard and really scary, I'm actually afraid of heights, which I
Oh,
always seem to forget until I'm like halfway up some sort of steep situation. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm afraid of heights. But like that's at the far end of the adventure spectrum. But you can also be at the low end of the adventure spectrum and just try something new or read a different type of book or listen to a different genre of music. Like it can be this big or it can be this big. And I think that's also one of the fun things about values is how do you take a look at the whole continuum of them and where are you comfortable on that continuum?
yeah. So I know that you do a lot of corporate trainings through your work with Resilience Institute. Can you talk to us about what you're seeing in the workplace? What are some of the trends that you're noticing in the workplace? Why are companies bringing you in? What is on the radar for these organizations?
Absolutely. And in partnership with the Resilience Institute, we just did a survey on the intersection between mental health and employee performance. And 46 different team leaders of a variety of different industries took the survey and gave us some information. And we're definitely seeing the majority of folks, 70 some percent actually, saw a marked increase in mental health concerns for their employees since COVID. About 11% saw an increase just even in the last 6 months. And the top 2 concerns that are kind of the loudest right now for employers taking a look at their employees is that they're seeing a lot of both anxiety and burnout, seeing a little bit of some acting out behaviors and things like that. But really, the anxiety and the burnout were the 2 largest concerns. And how that's impacting performance was really notable. So they're seeing employees who are missing deadlines. They're not communicating well. They seem overwhelmed in their day to day and they're having trouble kind of organizing their work well. They're in conflict with either their peers or their supervisors. And they're also having a difficult time hearing feedback or having a difficult conversation. So it really feels like that overlap between some of the mental health concerns and the performance concerns, teaching people about how to be mentally fit, not just physically fit. And a big piece of that is resilience so that you can work with what's actually going on and then bounce back from difficulties and have that core faith that you're able to do it, instead of what we're running into right now is this sort of core doubt that you can do it. So developing that resilient core is a really big focus of our work right now.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How do you develop your mental fitness? What specific, like if somebody is listening and they're resonating with what you just described and they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's me. I'm doing all these things."
Yeah.
What are some of the first baby steps?
Well, it's super interesting. The building blocks of mental health are actually physical. And we also have some data on this again through the Resilience Institute. We have an assessment called the Resilience Assessment. It's now in its 5th iteration and 20 years in, so it's well researched. And we took a look at 6,500 participants who've taken the Resilience Assessment and taking a look at what are the differentiators for the folks who score high on the assessment, meaning they're quite resilient, and what are the characteristics of the folks who score low on the assessment, meaning that their resilience needs to be worked on. And the answer was interesting. It's the folks who are actually taking care of some of their physical attributes, and then they're also taking care of their mental flexibility. So if we start with those physical attributes, the building blocks of mental fitness are actually sleep, exercise, and nutrition. how are you fueling yourself? How are you moving your body? And then how are you actively recovering? One of the things we're seeing a lot of is people will push, 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 and then they collapse, like binge watching Netflix, right?
Yep.
Instead of push, push, relax, regroup, rejuvenate, and then go back for more pushing. So folks are pushing themselves kind of beyond a limit. And then the way that they are relaxing isn't actually relaxing. It's actually kind of collapsing. And while some of us, all of us need to do that occasionally, if we're doing that regularly, it actually means that we're not refilling our tanks. And so we want to be pushing, having an appropriate level of challenge, and then actually truly rejuvenating, resting, and then coming back in.
How does somebody know whether an activity is relaxing or collapsing?
So it's a great question. The number one way to tell is, do you actually have more energy or less energy afterwards? And so one of the things that you'll see when we're in that collapse mode is everything feels really exhausting. And even if you spend several hours in that collapse mode, you don't then feel refreshed or more energy at the end of it. You still kind of feel really depleted. And so it can be important to figure out, what are the things that actually do fill your tank? And again, if we go back to that physical, sleep, exercise, and nutrition, when we're feeding ourselves well, right, about 80% of the time, you're going to run a little better. When we are then moving our bodies, number one, it helps clear our thoughts. Number two, that is a push that then the recovery from that tends to give us energy. And then when we're sleeping without the television on, without tons of blue light all the way up until the minute you go to bed, without, all sorts of stressful conversations right before you go to bed, trying to create that rest aspect, I think, is really important. And some of those are super concrete behaviors, like cutting down on the blue light, increasing nutrition, increasing exercise, and do exercise that you want to do, right? Like, not everybody needs to go to the gym. Dance in the kitchen with your toddler if you want. Like, that's movement. It's not movement. I like that term better than exercise, I guess, because I think a lot of people think exercise is either too hard or something that is not for them.
Is there a recommended amount of movement, either every day or every week?
Yeah, there's some very interesting psychology research that demonstrates that moderate level intensity, minimum of 20 minutes at a time, about 4 days a week, is incredibly protective for our mental health.
And how do you know what is moderate level activity?
I think we all know that, well, I'll use the example in my house. When I take my dogs for a walk, that's pretty low intensity because the walk is really more like a sniff.
Yeah.
And I'm taking them out to go and sniff amazing things, right? But if I want that to get to moderate intensity, either I can increase the time of it, right? So if we go for an hour, I feel like that counts. Or if you can notice that your breathing is a little bit elevated, right? You're not just out on a total stroll. I think those are pretty easy markers.
And the sleep, the movement, the nutrition, those are three categories that we hear about all the time,
We
talk
do.
about all the time. Why is it so hard for those three foundational pieces for people to get those things right?
Couple of different things. Number one, we have a little bit too much choice.
Mm.
So this notion of, you walk into a grocery store and there's 50,000 products for you to choose from, and it's actually easier to choose the really highly processed thing than it is to figure out how to make a salad, right? It just is. Number two, we have these lovely little squares that look like this that are highly addictive and designed to be highly addictive. And they kick us into a couple of different things. Number one, we're constantly multitasking, right? How often have you been in a meeting with someone and all of a sudden they're checking their wrist, right? Because they've gotten a text. So the connection to you it's now down here and it's now out there. So the multitasking that we're constantly doing is actually incredibly fatiguing to our brains. Also, the notion of, you're working on a work product and then your email notification comes in and then your Slack gets pinged, and right. So we're constantly in that multitasking mode, which, as much as some people, myself included, will sometimes be like, I'm a great multitasker, from a brain perspective, we're actually typically not good multitaskers. It actually is dividing our attention and it's slowly exhausting us. So putting some limits on things like how often are you interrupted, how much are you on screen time, and then really changing our relationship with the light that we're giving ourselves so that then we can kick into our natural hormones that help us sleep. So we have these small things that are all adding to make it more and more difficult.
Yeah.
Also, there's a cost to a lot of it that I think can sometimes be intimidating, right? How much does a gym membership cost? How much does it cost in your time and energy to get to the gym? If you are a working parent, somebody tells you to go and spend 4 hours a week working out and you're like, in what time? How? Like where? How would I do that? And so it's figuring out small ways to make those things more accessible. So things like take the dogs for a walk after dinner. It's an amazing soother for your brain and it is free. You probably already have a pair of sneakers. It's good for everybody in the whole household, including the dog and the kids. And the benefits that it provides are really substantial for the time that it takes.
So you mentioned that these were the top 3: sleep, movement, nutrition. What else was on that list?
So the big next level on that list is what I call psychological flexibility, or I can call mental fitness. But the concept of psychological flexibility is where we are working with the reality we actually have instead of waiting for the reality that we want. Have you ever talked to somebody who has said, well, I'll feel better when? Right? But the interesting thing is we actually only have right now. And the more we are either tracking to the past in regret or we're tracking to the future in hope, the less we are in agency in the present moment. And so I talk about this concept of acceptance and immediately we'll often get feedback of like, yeah, but I don't accept that because this is bad or this is happening in the world, or right? Like, and you even talk to somebody and all of a sudden their tone of voice is going, right? They're ratcheting up and you can see the internal stress externally, right? You can see how much stress and tension they have. And acceptance is not about approval. Acceptance is just acknowledging what is so. So what's actually true right now, whether you want it to be or not. Deep breath. That's acceptance. But when we have that acceptance, then we can move into more choice and we have more flexibility in our choices. Because if we are waiting for something to be exactly how we want it to be, that's so much rigidity. Right? If we are in acceptance of what's going on, even if it's something that we don't like, then we can actually take a look more clearly at what the options are and then figure out, and this is my favorite question, Anne, what's your next best move, right? And then once you're taking a look at what's your next best move, oftentimes then you can actually do the next best move. But notice it isn't what's the next best thing that I want to have happen for me to make life easier. That's not the question. The question is, what's my next best move? And sometimes that can be as simple as making the phone call, making the meal, doing the work product that you've been procrastinating on, having the hard conversation. What's my next best move? How does that land for you? How does that overlap with your work?
Well, I think it's so powerful because, one of the things that we talk about in Empower Journey is this idea of focusing on your desired outcome. And I think those two questions are so aligned. Like, what do you really want? What's your next best move? Really moving you in the direction of focusing on what is within your control that you can do that moves you towards what you really want. Just
Yeah.
thinking,
And it circles all the way back down to that platform of values, right? It's
Yeah.
hard to know what you really want if you don't actually know what's really important to you.
Okay, so there is sleep, movement, nutrition, mental fitness. What else is on that list?
My other 2 favorite things on that list are meaningful connections and meaningful work, right? So having a sense of purpose and commitment, having I grew up mostly in Virginia Beach, and we're around the corner from where the Navy SEALs train. And
Mm.
one of the things that's really cool about being around the corner from Navy SEALs is sometimes you get to watch them work out on the beach. And oh my gosh, their workouts are fascinating, right? And some of their workouts look so mean, right? Like they're doing sit ups while the waves are breaking on them, and they're doing push ups and the waves are going into their face,
Yeah, they're just
right?
up.
And you think to yourself, why would you voluntarily do this? This looks terrible. But the reason they're doing it is that they have a mission, right? They have a mission and a purpose. It's clearly identified and it's worth struggling to get to.
Mm.
And I think one of the things in our society is we're so committed to making things easy that we're forgetting that a little bit of friction actually is a really cool thing for humans. So doing something that's a little bit hard for yourself, I'm not willing to do the workout with the waves in my face, but something that's a little bit hard because you're committed to it and you have a mission and a purpose. That's a big driver. And it's also really helps with resilience, right? Because then it's worth it to bounce back.
It's
Yeah.
interesting that you're connecting doing the hard thing with purpose and meaning. That's a really fascinating take because in our program, we teach an exercise called life changing challenges. This idea of doing the
Oh,
hard
cool.
thing and how it helps you. Doing the hard thing is actually an antidote to living a life on autopilot, right? Like the hard,
Correct.
getting yourself out of your comfort zone. And, and so it's really interesting for you hearing you connect the dots between that hard and how that is directly connected to giving you meaning and purpose and building your resilience. I love that.
Absolutely. And it's also really protective against anxiety.
Mm.
Anxiety will tell you that you shouldn't do something, right? That you can't do something, that you shouldn't do something. And anxiety can be so loud, but it's interesting because as soon as you actually do the thing, and whether or not you do it perfectly or not, it actually dampens the voice of anxiety as soon as we start moving into doing the thing anxiety is telling you you can't. So, a piece of this mental fitness development and resilience development is just what you were talking about. Do the hard thing. And then the interesting thing is, if you do this hard thing, then
Right.
that gives your brain the information that it was safe enough to do this. So then you can do this hard thing. And then the next thing you know, you can do that harder thing. And occasionally you'll reach a wall and say, like, I can't do it, right? Like if I go back and use that via ferrata example, which is essentially it was climbing a 13,000-foot mountain by using iron rungs that you were strapped into in your kind of rock climbing and hiking combination. I'm not describing it very well, but that was a hard thing. Maybe it was a little harder than that, right? That was a hard thing. One of the folks on my trip was a rock climbing guide. For her, it was a really pretty easy thing. And for me, it was a hard thing that I really enjoyed. And I didn't then become a rock climber, right? Like it was okay to reach a limit and to say, like, that was really hard. That was really fun. And I'm probably good,
Yeah.
right? So it's also that ongoing assessment of where am I? How am I doing? What's going well? What's going poorly? What would I like to do about it? What's my next best move? So, again, that psychological flexibility is consistently doing an assessment and then purposely developing some of those skills, that grit and resilience, where it's like, I can do hard things. Okay. And if something feels too hard, then it's a great time to reach out to those meaningful connections, right? Like, hey, I think I've run into a limit. Can you help me? Or, hey, I've run into a limit. I don't know how to do this. Can you point me in a direction of some good information? So it's that thing where all of this kind of ends up all of it builds on itself and it becomes a positive upward spiral. Anxiety is a negative downward spiral, right? And burnout, very negative downward spiral. But those are experiences where everything is building on itself to end up actually making things worse. Resilience is actually a learnable skill, and you can do all of these small behaviors and get in that upward spiral that we're looking for.
So if somebody is listening and they are tracking, resonating with the checklist that you gave us earlier about the signs of experiencing anxiety and burnout, and they're thinking about my sleep is not great, I'm not getting great movement, my nutrition is not where it should be. I'm kind of listening and thinking, okay, maybe I'm doing all the things wrong.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost like overwhelming to like if I'm already in this hole and
Yep.
then the idea of trying to climb out of this hole with things that I've been struggling with my entire life, how do I even start? How do I get back on track?
Well, and that's actually a great example of the downward tug, right? Of I'm so far down here, I might as well not even try,
Um,
collapse. And so that's actually where that question of what's my next best move comes in. What's the easiest, most accessible thing that you think that you can do today? Not tomorrow, not for the rest of your life, right? Like no big pressure, but like what could you do today? Years ago, I was working with a client who was profoundly depressed, like clinically diagnosably, on meds, needed meds, depression, big deal depression. And one of the things that we know is that if you, again, like listening to anxiety, it's just going to be a major downward spiral. This client was in a major downward spiral with depression. And in identifying what could they possibly do from a psychology, right? Like from a personal psychology in between sessions situation, we decided that the easiest first step was for her to open her blinds. It was that small, Anne. It was go home and open your blinds. Let some light into your house. And then stopped the conversation of like, well, I mean, I could open my blinds, but then my windows are dirty. And if my windows are dirty, right? Like, and it was like,
mhm.
all we're doing is open our blinds this week. It's the only thing we're doing. Just open your blinds. Every morning, open your blinds. If you want to close them at night, fine. But then every morning, open your blinds. And we did that for a week. And then that next week, it was like, all right, how are we doing with opening the blinds? Opening the blinds. It's all right, and actually felt and noticed a little bit of a bump in her mood. And then one of the next things we picked, again, so small, was clean her kitchen. When the next things we picked was she really likes plants, right? Go back to that values conversation. What's important to her? What brings her joy? And the answer was plants. So because she was opening her blinds, now she could have a plant because there was now some light in her apartment, right? And so again, it isn't this notion of I have to change everything. Everything's wrong with me. I have to change everything. That's impossible. So I should do nothing. That's actually anxiety and or depression talking and keeping you stuck. So
How do,
let's do the one thing, even if it's tiny.
yeah, so I love this. How do you get over the head trash around, oh, but that's so small. Why would I even do that little thing? Like there's almost shame in starting too small,
Uh-huh.
right? Like we want to do it all and we want to do it all right now. And so how do we get over this self-judgment of that's too small of a step? What do you mean you're just going to
Well,
open the blinds?
so here's the thing that's really interesting. That's going to come up. The head trash is going to come up. And one of the things, if we go back again to that conversation that we were talking about earlier with like, I'll do this when, your job isn't to make the head trash go away. It's actually to be like, hey, head trash, Carrie said you were going to show up. Thanks for coming. And I'm going to open the blinds anyway. So instead of trying to like stuff it down or make it go away, or you're only okay once it's not there, we all have head trash. And I teach this stuff all the time and have to deal with head trash, right? So head trash is just a part of it. But my experience, both for myself personally and with my clients, is that it tends to have less of a platform and less of a voice if we acknowledge it and then do what we're going to do anyway. And if the head trash is trying to say, like, that's really small. The answer is like, well, I'm going to start here really small, and then I'll check in and see if I have enough bandwidth to be able to do another thing too. Thanks for the invitation for me to try another thing too. So again, it's having this conversation, and it's also notice that I'm talking to the head trash, right? So there's me and then there's the head trash, and there's some space in between me and the trash. The trash isn't me. It's just thoughts that are going to come up. Hey, aren't you predictable? You're here again.
I love that idea of the space between you and the head trash. It's like when we teach the kids to say, I am feeling angry instead of I am angry, right?
Exactly.
Creating that space, that distance between the emotion, the thoughts, and you as the human.
Yeah. And it goes like this, right? Like I hear a ton of people talk about my anxiety. We now have this like badge of honor in our culture where it's actually like really cool to have some sort of label. Everybody's diagnosing themselves. Please stop. And then not only are they diagnosing themselves, then they're claiming it, right? Like, well, my anxiety prevents me from doing blah, 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 right? Number one, it's not your anxiety. Anxiety is making a hostile takeover. And if you can do that exact languaging, my anxiety, a little bit of distance looks like I'm anxious.
Mm.
A little bit more distance is I notice that I'm feeling anxious. A little bit of distance is I notice that anxiety is trying to convince me of this, that, or the other thing. How interesting. And then even more distance. One of my favorite visuals is from Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's a really enjoyable book, um, written in these very short chapters. And so I used to use it when I was in car line waiting to pick my daughter up from school. It was, you needed to kill some time in car line. And so I'd read, anywhere between 1 to 3 of these little things and then pick the kiddo up. She's now grown and flown. One of Elizabeth Gilbert's conversations in this book was talking about how she started treating anxiety like a bad passenger in her car. And I think she referred to it as like her less enjoyable second cousin or something like that, right? And so you kick them out of the family, and yet they don't need to be driving the car. And I would say head trash, anxiety, depression, burnout, like any of these characteristics, they're lousy drivers. They take you to destinations you don't want to go. And they suck as navigators, right? They aren't even any good in the passenger seat because they have terrible taste in music and they're chattering about how you needed to make a left instead of a right, but you're sure you need to make a right. Right. And so again, like this distance of like, you can even make whatever you want to call your head trash, you can make them almost like a character in your life and give them a name. And periodically you can do things like, you have to sit in the back seat. No, you don't. Like, no, you're not driving. You're not driving today.
Powerful. I mean, that's an image that I'm gonna.
Well, it also makes it fun, right? Like when we're getting beat up by head trash, it's never any fun. It's never saying like, nice job. You did such a great job today, right? Like it's always some terrible thing that's trying to make you feel awful about yourself. And so if you can have some humor about it, like, the less enjoyable second cousin, you're piping up again. No offense to the second cousins.
Okay, so earlier you mentioned meaningful connections. Talk to me
Yes.
about what that means and how do we find them? How do we know that we're doing that right?
Absolutely. Well, and it was funny last night. I was in a conversation with a group of girlfriends, and one of my friends was talking about how she doesn't really like having a ton of connections. She likes having a small group of friends, and it takes her a while to curate them. And there was another person in the group who, probably has a Christmas card list of like 200 people, right? Like totally different. And so what meaningful connections looks like and how many of them there are totally varies by person. However, it's that notion of feeling like there's people that you care about and people who care about you. And sometimes that can be really big, deep relationships. And sometimes it can be as small as, one of my clients came in the other week and was talking about the barista at their local coffee shop who knows their coffee order. And they walk up to the counter and they say hello and they use each other's names. And the barista just knows a little bit. And my client knows a little bit. And it's a teeny connection. It's not very deep, but it is actually meaningful, even though it's that small. So these meaningful connections, it doesn't have to be some big, grand fairy tale romance. It can actually be a series of different levels, right? From the barista up to having your right partner.
And how do we know that part is full? Like, how do we know that we've kind of checked that box of good meaning?
I have a bias, and anytime I'm biased, I always like to try and share it. My bias is that I feel like we have hearts that have an unlimited capacity to connect with other people. Now, this may be because connection is one of my values and because I actually really like human beings. I know several people who would say they don't really like human beings very much. They really prefer dogs or horses or, just two people in the whole wide world. But I think we have a sense of that when we feel like we have someone to talk to and when we feel like we can know enough about someone else to be able to check in on them, right? Like the interesting thing about meaningful connections isn't just about filling your cup. It's about a symbiotic relationship where there's some give and take in the relationship. If someone's curious how your day is, you're also curious about how their day is. The meaningful connection is bi-directional situation.
I love that. Okay, can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yes. Oh my gosh. And so my book is the book that my clients asked me to write. It is called Self-Help on the Go, and it's 99 of my favorite tips and tricks to navigate a world of inevitable ups and downs. I wrote it in part because my clients kept bringing in books and saying, I don't need 200 pages on anger management. I just need to know what to do the next time my boss is being a jerk. So there's 10 chapters with 10 typical problems that we all run into: stress, anxiety, relationships, communication, anger, all of those things. And there's 10 tips in each chapter. Most of them are things that you open the book, take a look and see and give it a try right then. A couple of the tips are what I call going deeper tips, which are practices over a longer period of time. But yeah, it's all about that notion of life is going to have ups and downs. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. I think we've made a huge mistake in the self-help industry where we are essentially telling people if they just think hard enough that they'll manifest a problem-free life, and then they feel like failures when it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because that isn't what life is.
What is your favorite tip from the book?
I think one of my favorite tips, and this is what I call the cupcake method of recovery. And this was a long time ago. And I'd had a terrible day on top of a terrible week on top of a terrible quarter, right? Like all of life's problems seemed to be piled in one big pile. And I came home and I picked up my kiddo, and I think she had also had a terrible day. And we were supposed to go and do something productive, and I don't even remember what that was. And what we decided to do instead was to go to our local cupcake shop, and we each picked out a cupcake, and we went to the park, and we sat on the swings, and we just hung out and had a cupcake. And now notice we didn't have 15 cupcakes, right? But we did that combination of things that I think the cupcake method of recovery is talking about, which was we went and got ourselves a little treat. We cried uncle when things got to be too much. We did some nice connection. We went outside and we purposely took some time off of the problems and then picked ourselves back up and went back to, all of what we needed to do. The cupcake method of recovery.
I'm going to try that. So, if people are listening and they want to learn more about your work, they want to connect with you, what's the best way for people to get in touch?
Thank you so much for asking. The best way is to go to my website, selfhelponthego.com. It's the same as the title of my book, selfhelponthego.com. And that gives you all of the information about where to get me. There's a contact form if you want to reach out. You can, it gives you my phone number, all of that good stuff. So everything's all in that one place.
We will also drop all those links in the show notes for the access.
That's perfect.
It's been so incredible chatting with you today. I've learned so much, so many practices that I plan on taking back into my own life. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, Dr. Carrie.
Thank you, Anne, and I hope your listeners enjoy this and that it's helpful. It was really great to be with you this morning.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks for tuning in to Empowered Living. I hope today's conversation sparked some inspiration and gave you tools to live more intentionally in your family, work, and life. If you enjoyed our episode today, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an inspiring story or actionable takeaway. And if you know someone who would love this episode, share it with them, because living an intentional life is better when we do it together. Until next time, remember, the life you want doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. Let's keep creating it one step at a time.